which was organized in the stress, but which is completely very interesting because and very important subject because we don't speak a lot about seafood, about fish, about sea resources and so on. And I think it's a good initiative to have such a report on standards and the blue economy. Thank you for being here. And before to give you the, well, I have to apologize because could not change. I just came back from China this morning and my suitcase was a little bit delayed. So, but I would like to ask you to sign our golden book and just a signature here. And I have a little souvenir for you. It's the cartoons for peace. We have inaugurated last week on the Kerwin Sun. Yeah. And so I think you, Anne, you will start, or this is Mr. Onguglo will begin. Okay. Thanks. So I have the pleasure to give the word to Mr. Bonapas Onguglo, who is the head of UNCTAD's Trade, Environment, Climate Change and Sustainable Development branch. And after Mrs. Wilkings will go on with the presentation. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My pleasure to be here. And if you don't mind, I'll just say, Guy,
Yes,
thank you
sure,
for the welcome to the press club and for this briefing. It's a real pleasure for me to be here on behalf of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD, to be with you and to be with my colleague Anne Wilkinson from the International Institute for Sustainable Development based in Ottawa. They produced this very innovative book publication on standards and the blue economy about seafood. And Ms. Wilkinson will tell you all about it. I would like to provide some introductory remarks to the issue of the blue economy and sustainability. So my first point is to say that, as you are all aware, 2015 was a very big year for the international community on sustainable development. And we all celebrated when we adopted the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the 17 Sustainable Development Goals in September. This was a major effort by the community of nations, by the United Nations member states, and all other stakeholders, NGO, academics, everyone had an input into that. They adopted 17 goals which will guide the work of the international community in the next 15 years up to 2030 in terms of development, sustainable development, in the 3 pillars of sustainable development, which is the economic pillar, the environmental pillar, and the social pillar. All those 3 dimensions are integrated into those sustainable development goals. One of those goals, and the goals are, they are individual goals, but they are all interrelated. Achieving one goal has an impact on achieving the other goals. So they're all interrelated. And one of those goals has to do with oceans and oceans resources, which is called Goal 14. And for the first time, the international community has decided that the oceans resources, the ocean economy, let me put it this way, the oceans is a major asset of humanity, and we need to look at it in terms of both the health and sustainability of oceans and the resources within oceans, how to use that sustainably as well. So that Goal 14 has several targets that needs to be achieved, and it is within the context of the implementation of that Goal 14 that momentum is now being generated to look more closely at the idea of the ocean economy. Sometimes some people call it the blue economy. So you will hear terminologies like the ocean economy, the blue economy, in comparison to what has normally been called the green economy, dealing with terrestrial biodiversity. And now we're looking at the oceans economy and oceans resources, dealing with the ocean and the marine biodiversity as well. So This concept has come into the UN terminology and into the UN goals and programs. So we'll be focused on that, the international community, and within that, developing programs and measures to implement it. Now, one of those, the publication we're going to review today and which will be presented to us is about voluntary sustainability standards. When you look at commodities and products that are available from the ocean and from the land, these are resources that can be exhausted. When they are used in an unsustainable way, then you exhaust the use of those resources. And we find out that ocean resources are being exhausted through unsustainable practices and through the fact that population is growing, there's a higher demand on those resources. So, looking at ways and means to make the use of our natural biodiversity, either the land biodiversity or the marine biodiversity, more sustainable. And various programs are put into place to look at that. The publication that is presented today will be about the voluntary sustainability standards in the area of seafood sector. And that is a very important sector because this is a figure that came from a meeting we had yesterday and today on the oceans economy. 50% of animal protein that human beings consume comes from fish. The other 50% comes from meat and other products. So fish alone covers over 50% of the protein needs of human beings. So this is a very important factor as well. Fish is a major resource for many countries, especially small island states. They export a lot of fish, so they are dependent highly on fish and ocean-based tourism. And many of these small island states have small land size, but vast ocean areas. So the ocean resources becomes very important for them. So for them, the utilization of oceans and oceans resource in a sustainable manner is very important in terms of the present generation as well as the future generation. So fish is a product that we all consume. It accounts for over 50% of the protein needs of human beings. It is one of the most heavily traded food items. It represents about 10% of food items traded globally. So that means it's consumed heavily as well. The main exporters of fish and fish products are developing countries. The main importers are developed countries at present. So looking at how this product is traded, is harvested, traded, and consumed, the whole value chain from the ocean to the plate. How can you ensure sustainability in each stage as the fish is caught, harvested, produced, and consumed? And in ensuring sustainability in those different areas, we have put in place many different programs. In UNCTAD, for example, we have what's called the UN Forum on Voluntary Sustainability Standards. We come together with a number of UN organizations to look and assess the evolution of these standards affecting products, basically natural products. And we also look at some of these marine species as well. IISD has done this publication on standards and the blue economy on the seafood industry, and I think they've got some very interesting findings which are applicable to that would be useful to us. The important thing that we have found out in standards is that their whole objective is to ensure sustainability in the production and harvest of the resources. And when they reach the market, they are consumed. So they enable the consumer. The consumer knows that the fish that they are consuming is sustainably harvested. In other words, it comes from sources that are not unsustainable, that are not illegally harvested, that are not detrimental to the ecosystem, that have less environmental impact. So the whole point is to ensure that the environmental good is maintained while you harvest, trade, and consume the product. So this is the role of the standards. Now, whether the standards actually finally in the ultimate, as they are placed, whether they ultimately achieve those objectives and whether many countries will be able to meet them is what we need to study and assess. And this is done by publications like this publication on standards and the blue economy. Many developing countries which are exporting fish, and many of them are small island states, do not have the capacity or the resources, and many of these fishers are small artisanal fishermen and fisherwomen. They do not have the capacity to evolve those standards. And this is also highlighted in the report as well, that for them to be able to take part in those standards, in ensuring that the fish is caught in a manner that is sustainable and meeting some of the standards, they need to put in place very stringent and costly practices. So their integration into those standard setting bodies and processes and how they can get integrated into the supermarkets is another factor, so that their resources, which can be sustainably harvested, is also then generate income that benefits the local communities, the fisher communities that actually are able to produce those. So it's an important concept in terms of ensuring the sustainability of the ocean resource, as well as ensuring that the revenue generated is shared with the local communities. Now, we all know that over 80% of fish is, the figures show that 80% of fish is over-harvested. So we have reached a kind of a peak in terms of wild catch fish. Now, either we need to engage in more sustainable practices, less destructive to the environment, less destructive to the ocean, less destructive to the fish resources itself, or we begin to look at aquaculture and other practices which to meet the needs of the growing human population that's demanding this fish as a food and fish for protein. So more and more you begin to see aquaculture come into play, and aquaculture, the sustainability standards as regard aquaculture is also important to see that they have less detrimental effect on the environment and less detrimental effect on human beings as well. So those standards are set in place to ensure such criteria are met. So I think with those words, I would like to say I'm pleased to be here. I'm pleased that that IISD has produced this very important report on standards and the blue economy, and I hope that it will be widely circulated, because we're dealing with seafood sector and with fish, which is one of the most important item in terms of our food commodity, one of the most important traded item as well, and one of the most important sea resource, which is almost reaching exhaustion, and we need to get governments and the international community mobilized to deal with these resources, which is affected by many unsustainable practices, which need to be transformed. And I think that, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, this goal that the United Nations, the global community has adopted on Sustainable Development Goal 14 on oceans and oceans resources, could set the momentum in which governments can move more decisively into addressing this. So, Guy, thank you very much for this, and I give you back the floor.
Thank you very much. So.
Thank you, Bonapas, for that, and Guy, thank you for having us here. Okay, so just to let you know what I'm planning on doing here, I'm going to give you an outline of the key findings, just to place you in context, and then I'll present the findings in more detail, and then I'll sum it up at the end. So, in point form, our key findings: certified seafood production is growing rapidly. A large percentage of certified seafood is coming from wild catch, but aquaculture is growing faster. Certified seafood is concentrated across a small number of species groups. The regions producing the highest volumes of certified production are disproportionate to the regions that produce the highest volumes of global production. Limited market growth and underdeveloped infrastructure contribute to lack of expansion of sustainable seafood production. There is a lack of overall comprehensive social requirements across seafood standards, particularly in the wild catch sector. And there is a relatively diverse stakeholder group representation on boards of standards, but there is opportunity for increased presence of developing country representation. So this SSI Seafood Review covers 9 voluntary sustainability standards operating across the wild catch and aquaculture sectors. Some work in both sectors and some work in either or. The SSI covers standards that are global in scale. So these standards were chosen not only for their global presence, but also for their market presence and for some of their unique characteristics. The standards shown here on the screen account for approximately 14% of the world's seafood. The seafood sector is important because seafood products are one of the most important commodities in terms of value traded globally. The seafood economy was worth close to $130 billion in 2012, with both the primary and secondary seafood sectors supporting an estimated 10 to 12% of the world's population. So along with this booming seafood sector comes a number of sustainability issues, such as, but not limited to, the loss of aquatic ecosystems and habitats, overexploitation of fish stocks, as well as unfair labor practices, which has come to the fore most recently with the slave labor reports on some fishing vessels. There are 2 main systems of production for fisheries. It's wild fish harvesting and aquaculture. And together, these production systems contribute significantly to global prosperity and human well-being. So the SSI is a reporting service on voluntary sustainability standards operating across various commodity sectors. In addition to our reporting services and market data collection platform, we develop a series of SSI reviews. These reviews provide objective, reliable, and timely information on the state of sustainability initiatives. So why does this matter? Well, there's a need for improved information exchange among stakeholders involved in voluntary sustainability standards, as well as among the standards themselves. As more standards enter the marketplace, things are becoming more and more complex. So what is it that we hope to achieve? Well, we hope to provide various stakeholders, including governments, procurement agents, investment advisors, CEOs, policymakers, sustainability initiatives, and NGOs, with high-level data and analysis to help navigate the increasingly complex field of sustainability standards. So this slide shows production of certified seafood compared with conventional seafood production in 2015. The pie graph on the right breaks down the percentage of certified production across the standards assessed in this review. Sustainable seafood production has grown rapidly over the past decade and now represents a significant portion of global production. Between 2003 and 2015, certified seafood, both aquaculture and wild catch, grew from 2.2 million metric tons, which was 1.7% of global production, to 23 million metric tons, which is 14% of global production, at a rate of 30% per annum. This is 10 times faster than the growth of global seafood production over the same time period. Retail value in 2015 was $11.5 billion. So the figure on this slide shows certified and non-certified wild catch landings and aquaculture production from 2003 to 2015. 79% of sustainable seafood is wild catch, but as mentioned earlier, certified aquaculture is actually growing faster. Historically, the most pronounced seafood-related sustainability challenges have revolved around the maintenance of stock levels of wild fish. Consequently, the supply and demand for certified seafood has largely focused on capture fishing. Over the last decade, as a result of supply constraints and certified wild catch, combined with the growing importance of aquaculture, certified aquaculture production has grown at a rate of 76%, compared with 42% for wild catch. The certified and global seafood pie graphs on this slide show the percentage of total production by key species group. Certified seafood is concentrated across a relatively small number of species groups. There are only 5 groups that account for 69% of certified seafood production, which suggests that certified markets are primarily targeting high-value species. With the exception of certified anchoveta, the main species groups of cod, salmon, tuna, and mackerel represent high-value species destined for developed country retail markets. By comparison, the top 5 species groups in global production are carp, anchoveta, shrimp and prawns, tuna, and tilapia, which account for 33% of global production. When we look at production by region, we see that the regions producing the highest volumes of certified production are disproportionate to the regions that produce the highest volumes of global production. Shown here are a global distribution of certified seafood production in 2015, compared with conventional seafood production in 2013 by volume. Only 5 countries account for 65% of certified seafood production, with the highest concentration of certified production in Peru, the US, Norway, Chile, and Russia. Interestingly, Asia, which produces 69% of global seafood, only accounts for 11% of certified production. Europe, which represents only 10% of global seafood, produces 3 times more in certified production at 29%. And South America, producing only 8% of global seafood, represents 35% of certified production. So the map here shows certified wild catch as a proportion of total wild catch by fishing zone in 2015. Our assessment of certified seafood supply suggests supply constraints will limit growth in certified wild catch without major capacity improvements. A general rule in the certification of wild catch fisheries is the presence of reliable fish stock data. Based on current estimates, such data only exists for between 17% and 25% of global stocks. Unreliable and limited stock assessments present an important supply constraint for the growth of certified fish and/or appropriate stock management. It remains unclear whether demand for certified seafood is sufficient to drive investments in comprehensive stock assessments. So included in our assessment is coverage for environmental and social and economic criteria within the standard documents. And here I'm showing you the environmental coverage for the aquaculture standards. And for these standards, coverage of production inputs and outputs, such as synthetic inputs and wastewater management, show the greatest degree of coverage. GMOs are prohibited by all but one of the standards assessed. Ecosystem integrity follows closely behind waste and water management, and criteria on energy reduction and greenhouse gas emission are also low across the aquaculture standards, but fare slightly better than the wild catch standards. Here I show you the coverage for social criteria across the wild catch standards. And overall, there's a lack of social requirements across these standards, with an average coverage of only 35%. Now, the absence of social criteria in the wild catch sector can be explained in part by these standards' primary focus on stock and ecosystem preservation. With major international environmental agreements and past ecosystem experiences, it is understandable why such systems might place higher priority on environmental requirements. However, this group of wild catch standards continues to exclude more social criteria, regardless of international consensus on the need for a more integrated approach to sustainable development. We also do an assessment on, along with coverage, we look at assurance and engagement and responsiveness across the standards. And here I'm showing you our assessment on engagement. And our engagement analysis includes an assessment of public consultation and stakeholder decision-making in standard development processes, as well as board makeup of the standard organizations. And this slide shows board representation by stakeholder group and country. The bar graph on the top right shows that all the initiatives surveyed include some degree of representation of non-traditional stakeholders, such as producers and NGOs, in the management of their processes, and the vast majority include multi-stakeholder representation. Developing country participation, on the other hand, shows much opportunity for development, and that's the bar graph on the bottom left. IFOAM is the only initiative that shows an equal balance between developed and developing countries on their board. Most board representation of these initiatives favor developed country interests. So in conclusion, just to reiterate what was said in the beginning, our key findings are that there is rapid growth in seafood certification. There's currently a greater presence of certified wild catch, but aquaculture is growing faster. Certified seafood is concentrated across a small number of species, specifically high-value species. Regions producing highest volumes of certified seafood are not regions that produce the highest volumes of global seafood. There's limited market growth and underdeveloped infrastructure that threaten the lack of expansion of sustainable seafood production. And there is a need for increased attention to social requirements across seafood standards. And there's also a need for increased developing country representation on the boards of these initiatives. And with that, I will conclude and say thank you very much for your time. And I welcome any questions.
Thank you, Mrs. Wilkings, for these details. I think very interesting. You were very careful in your presentation because you didn't quote any specific country, but if I hear correctly, there is some better guys and some bad guys. Why, especially in Asia, if I interpret correctly your data, is it really bad guys, or it is because of poverty? Why in Asia, not specifically, there is so low certification and low, fair fisheries and so on, or maybe also in Europe, I don't know, but.
Well, in Asia, there's a lot of smallholder farms. So I think that's part of the issue, is that these smallholder and less developed countries are not accessing these sustainable markets as much as developed countries. Standards tend to target low-hanging fruit, and it's challenging not only for smallholders but for the standards themselves to access smallholders. So it's something that needs to be addressed, and technical assistance is definitely something that.
Some countries like Japan, who are big producers, and they have the capacity to improve, no?
Yes. There are also national standards. I believe Japan's got a national seafood standard, if I'm not mistaken. They're not that big on the certification map, I don't believe, so.
And the main problem is for aquaculture, or it is for wild catch, from your point of view?
For sustainability?
Yeah.
I think It's both, because wild catch is older, but wild catch, there's a lack of data. Like, there needs to be, improved data collection, so we know exactly what the state of stocks is. And aquaculture is newer. So, with newer practices comes lessons learned and relearned. So I think it's a bit of both.
I don't know if there are some questions from the audience. Yes, please. Il faut appuyer sur le bouton du micro. Micro.
Yes, I'm Helmut Lubbers. I operate a website, ecoglobe.ch. And my first question is about certified aquaculture. If you talk about certified aquaculture, what sort of certification do you have? Does it include details about the feed for the fish? And where is the feed coming from?
Yes, so inputs, feed, responsible sourcing of feed, wastewater management, water pollution, basically all the practices involved in aquaculture that could contribute to degradation of the environment. So it also looks at ecosystem integrity, biodiversity, greenhouse gas management, energy reduction, and then of course social requirements. We look at labor rights, human rights.
Chemicals too.
Oh, see, yes, chemical inputs, antibiotics, use of antibiotics, all the issues that come along with industrial production of aquaculture. Feed the masses fast. Where is the feed coming from? Well, it depends, really. I think it's coming from a lot of developing countries. Basically, where it comes from is as cheap as that they can find it. There is a standard out for fish feed and oil that we didn't include in our review. It's something that they're paying more and more attention to, because the small fish that they're using for feed for aquaculture is feed for poorer people. So it's definitely an issue that needs to be addressed along with all the other issues.
Not only an issue, it's a problem. Yeah? The feed is depleting the rest of the ocean. So certified aquaculture cannot be certified if the feed problem is not solved.
Many standards require that feed is raised on farms, like it's not actually wild caught in the sea. Well, of course, but we're all working on improving things, right? I don't have all the answers. I wish I did.
Thank you. Okay, please.
Hi. You mentioned that Peru and Chile were amongst the countries that had the largest production of sustainable fish. And I'd be actually interested in seeing a little bit more in detail exactly what that involves, because between the case of Chile, where there have been issues with damming for in certain areas, and that it's affecting the fish production, and also vis-a-vis the farmed fish, which is growing a lot, just as in I guess it's the second largest producer of salmon, if I'm not mistaken. But I'm just wondering, in terms of like imposing certain standards in these countries, I looked at Peru a couple of years ago, and how there's there are issues with fishing sharks. There's a lot of very small sharks that are being caught, and it's very difficult to actually impose and implement some of the regulations. I mean, how, yes, these countries perhaps are doing well on certain measures when it comes to sustainability, but how much of an issue is, implementation of regulations, and also, the regulations themselves, because I guess that in certain countries you might have regulations that may seem adequate for those countries or for the legislators of those countries, but when in fact, they don't really measure up to the sort of standards that we're talking about here.
Yes, it's interesting. I mean, it's one thing to analyze what's on paper, but it's another thing to analyze what's actually happening on the ground. And, there's been a lot of talk today about SDG 14, and I would also like to raise that SDG 17 is also very important because it's a partnership between governments and standards. Standards can't be expected to do it alone. It takes a lot of resources for conformity assessment processes to make sure that everything is happening the way it should, and it also involves government participation in order to make this work. So certification is relatively new. I think it's got potential to do what it's supposed to do, but lots of things have to be ironed out, just like everything has to be ironed out with so many different things. But I think if it's a collaboration and a partnership, I think that we can be successful, and it can be more inclusive, and it can actually implement the results that it's supposed to implement.
Yes, please.
Thank you. I think I would also like to say in response to your question is that some of these voluntary sustainability standards are, in a sense, non-governmental. They're private. So in a sense, they are private-driven initiatives by corporations or by... they respond to a demand, which is that many companies, supermarket chains and so on, see that in meeting consumers' needs, consumers' demand for sustainably produced food, maybe fish and the others, they see this as a niche market, maybe a premium market, and they need to ensure certain standards. And those producers, industrial or small fish producers, who would like to enter these premium markets need to conform with certain of these voluntary standards, so to speak. Voluntary, but more or less standards that will allow them to enter those premium markets. So when those takes place, then there is the kind of obligation. I won't put it like obligation, but requirement to put in place those requirements to ensure those sustainability standards are met. And then they're able to enter those markets. So there is, on the one hand, they're voluntary, but they are also, in a sense, mandatory to enter the market. And those who do not have those standards do not enter those markets. They may enter local markets or other markets. So as the data shows, they are increasing a lot. And I think it shows that the industry seems to see that this is a major area in which in terms of the industry industry view, this seems to be a growing area in which, in response to consumers and other objectives, could be an important sector. So those standards have become are increasing over the years, especially in the seafood sector as well. So. Yeah, so I think it's a market-based mechanism that's growing, but it's also responding to certain needs, the environmental needs to ensure sustainability of the fish and social issues as well. Thank you.
Can I just follow up on that? I mean, if you're saying that it's market-driven and it's sort of driven by these private companies that are most interested in retaining, I guess, the consumer. I mean, how can you truly assure that they're really that it's not just greenwashing and that they're just not putting a label on and people are just happy to buy because they think that it's sustainable enough? Standards
are improving when it comes to conformity assessment with the third-party certification. you know, they're getting more rigorous and putting more processes in place to ensure that, you know, they're credible, that their claims are credible in the market. Yeah, is there a possibility that, you know, things might get shoved under the rug a little bit? Maybe. But as certification grows and these standards become more and more present in the marketplace, they have to be able to, and not just this, but the retailers that, you know, say, okay, we're going to only sell MSC certified fish, you know, by the year 2018. These guys have to know that what they're selling is actually credible. So the standards have to step up to the plate and prove that, you know, that the product is good. So, I mean, this gentleman is laughing in the background because I know he's no, but I mean, I understand that there's room for.
No, I was not mocking you. I'm sorry.
Oh, no.
I was thinking of other things.
Oh, okay. No, it's okay. Yeah.
I have two questions. The first one, how do you see the long-term impact of culture fishery in regards to sauvage, to wild fishery in 10 years, 20 years? And the second question, do you have any degree of cooperation and control on the disputes between European states on fishery, given also in the context of Brexit discussions now? There are still ongoing conflicts between Spain and France, etc., in the context of the European Union.
With respect to aquaculture versus wild catch, I think that aquaculture is going to keep growing. If we don't do something about the state of our stocks, we won't have any more fish to fish. So, you know, something has to be done about data collection, something has to be done about monitoring and enforcement of illegal fishing practices, something has to be done now. Like it's already too late.
Can you do something? What are you doing?
What are we doing personally? We're writing this report. Well, our organization basically just looks at the standards. We try to assess the standards to see if they're doing what they say they're doing. We try to report to the public about what these standards do, what they cover, their governance systems. We try to show people, I mean, it's very confusing. You can go to the grocery store and you see all these labels, and most people don't have any idea what these labels mean. So we just try to explain to people that this is what these labels are, this is what they cover, this is their intention, this is what they're doing, this is what they're not doing, this is where they can improve on, this is where they're excelling in. So that's our job. And then when we disseminate this information, we're hoping that it's enough feed for policymakers to help make decisions and help, you know, I mean, there's issues with IUU fishing, but this is something that we're hoping will feed the fire to get things in motion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The second question, I truly can't answer, to be perfectly honest with you. I don't know enough about it.
There's no connection between you and the EU in this respect?
Well, I mean, we look at EU regulation. When it comes to standards, I mean, we look at organic, and there's EU regulation with organic, but when it comes to Brexit and the, honestly, I mean, I can get your email and I can answer your question and I can get the information and send it to you, no problem. But I just can't answer it right now for you, I'm sorry.
Please, Mr. Onguglo.
Thanks. You asked about the stock of wild caught fish and aquaculture, and I think I would like to also add to what Anna said, is that the FAO, they did the study and they said that that 87% of the world's marine fish stocks are fully exploited, overexploited, and depleted. So 87% are fully exploited. Now, unless we go back and look with the sustainability issues of wild fish caught, we have overused 87%. So you've used 87% of fish stock, of fish, and population is growing, quite rather rapidly, not so much in the north, but in developing countries. The population growth will be expanding more so in developing countries. And there's a need to feed. And as I was saying, 3 billion people are consuming fish, and over 50% of protein comes from fish. So there's going to be growing demand for fish. So there's going to be a slack in terms of fish caught from wild source, from the oceans. And that has to be met by aquaculture. And we see the figures, the trends are growing in them, that aquaculture is growing rather exponentially, and I think this is in your report as well, and that it's growing exponentially because it's beginning to respond to the demand, the growing demand for more fish to be made available. So it's coming from aquaculture as well. So yeah, so I think there's a trend. The trend as we look forward is that more and more tomorrow when you eat fish, you will be having fish from aquaculture fish. It's going to come from there, then from oceans, from wildcats, unless we do something now. And talk about doing something now. There are many. There are many ways and means in which to address this. One way is to look at sustainability standards to ensure that environmental, social objectives are captured in those standards, so that in meeting those standards, they would involve changes at the production and harvest level in terms of where the fish is actually caught. You also know that in the WTO, in terms of trade negotiations, there's been going on a lot of talk about the WTO Doha negotiations and needs to remove subsidies, fishing subsidies, which is a big issue, but still a lot of major difficulties over that, and that remains an unresolved matter. And mentioned these illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing practices, which need to be addressed as well. And countries are putting in place national regimes that will make sure that if fish is caught and identified as coming from an IUU source, then it will be rejected. So, like the EU is developing its policy on EU policy on IUU fishing. The US is also having a national policy on that, so that they want to discourage this practice. So a number of things are taking place as well, and there are several regional fisheries and regulations and regime in place. The EU has their own blue marine strategy as well. Other regional fisheries organizations have their regional fisheries policies as well to ensure that there is sustainability. So implementation at the regional level as well. So measures are in place, but it seems that we need to generate more momentum, because whatever is being done is not stopping this trend towards over-harvesting of fish. And there's more that needs to be done. Thank you.
Especially in Asia, because they are the more...
Just, I guess, having done this, what would be your advice to consumers? You're buying a piece of salmon at the supermarket. Some may have some of these labels on it, some may not. What would you advise to consumers? Should they be looking for certain of these labels? Would you endorse some over others?
My advice to consumers: I wouldn't endorse one label specifically over another, because labels have different focuses and different objectives. So MSC, for instance, doesn't include social requirements in their label because they're not a social standard, but as social issues become more to the fore, is something that can be less and less ignored. So to say I'm not buying MSC because they don't cover social requirements isn't exactly, that's not right. I had a colleague say to me one time, "I will not buy farmed fish, it's evil." And I thought, well, that's just not, you're not well informed. Sure, some could be evil, but not all of it. So it's, and this is why we're doing this report. It's a complicated field. It's, I've had people from sustainability standards say to me, it's complicated for us. So, how can we expect consumers to be able to know what they're buying by looking at these labels? It's too complicated and it's confusing. So hopefully this report helps lay some of that groundwork out. And as more and more of these labels come into play, there should be a degree of harmonization across these labels with respect to some of the requirements involved, because if there isn't, it's just going to get too confusing.
Is that a trend that you see in other sectors, that there is a consolidation of these different, or do you see a proliferation over time?
A bit of both, actually. There's proliferation, but there is harmonization along some of the seafood standards that we looked at with respect to some of the requirements that they want. So Global G.A.P and Friend of the Sea have united where if you comply with an additional set of small requirements, you can, and I don't have the facts in front of me, but I believe you can have both labels on the, you can have the GNN number, the Global G.A.P number, as well as the Friend of the Sea label. So you've got like almost a double certification, but it's a certain requirement. So they are harmonized, they are trying to harmonize to avoid double certification. Yeah, it's something that's going to have to come more and more into play as more and more labels come to the fore.
Can I add something?
Yeah, sure.
I was in the supermarket. I think I was in the supermarket in Migros or something 2 weeks ago, and then I was just walking around, and I had a family, and then I saw a family walk by, and the man said, "Who est la section bio?" I mean, well, he said, "Where's the organic or bio section?" And somebody said, "It's here." So he went and picked up his stuff and then went. So I think, and Switzerland is one of the most one of the most consumers, one of the biggest consumer of organic food products. But I think what your question you are asking is very pertinent in the sense that beyond knowing where the bio section is, to see what those labels, those standards actually mean, and the challenge now in some of the other product standards is to look at the labels and to be able to say, okay, this standard says this. Is it actually coming from there? Is your question, what if it's a fish that was produced by aquaculture and it says that it's sustainably produced, where is the feedstock coming from, and so on? These are the details that the consumer needs to begin to deal with, to be able to really say that it's, and then to challenge the standard setters and make us to make this. But this is a big step. This is a big step forward because you're asking the consumer to do a lot of things, and the consumer is already placing a lot of trust in the supermarket chain, saying that, well, okay, and those and the standard setting bodies saying that they've already put in place rigorous monitoring and implementation mechanisms. So I trust them that when they say it's actually MSC certified, which is sustainable, then fine. But I see it's still a way to go as well for the consumer, in fact. And because that's interesting, because your report says that as I was saying, that some of the multiplication, the growth of certified seafood products is in reaction to industry demand more so than in reaction to consumer demand. Because the industry is leading more than the consumer. The industry sees a need. So consumers like we go and say, okay, where's the organic section? We go and get organic from Co-op. Co-op is the best supplier of organic food in Switzerland. We go there, we trust them, we buy. So, yeah, thanks.
Other questions? If not, yes, the last one. Yeah.
All right. When you were coming up with these figures, did you deal? You were talking about double certification. Did you get actually did you have to deal with double reporting, or I mean, did you have to sort of seed through each label being reporting possibly the same product, or?
Yeah, double certification is a bit of an issue, and I'm not the market guy, but our market guys had to, when they did the data, they had to compensate for double certification. They used a specific methodology, and it is in the report. I wouldn't be able to tell you what that is right now, but yeah, it is an issue that needs to be, dealt with because some producers are spending so much money on more than one certification. So, yeah.
Thank you. I think it's more a comment. No, you can answer if you wish. But I don't know if you have the right answer. You can. But it's difficult question, and I think it's general comment. But
Good closing comment.
yeah. Okay. So thank you also for this comment. I think it's very important point because it could solve a lot of problems. Yes, if we succeed to stop the world population growth. Okay, thanks again for your report, for your answers, and also for your questions. And I think, yes, as I said, it is really a big concern for our future. So thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.